which party controls the state is usually a pretty good predictor of what voter access is going to look like. That's been particularly true and sort of supercharged in the Trump era. As a general rule, there are exceptions on both the left and the right. Blue states seek to make voter access more convenient, expanded, and red states don't. It's sort of that simple. And this has become hugely polarized, and national politics, not that they weren't always highly relevant in state houses, but they've got their tentacles in state houses now in a way that I haven't seen previously. I'll give you a good example. I just came back from Utah, which is a red state that, in contrast to every other red state in the country, has universal all-male voting. And it's been a phenomenal success in Utah. Turnout is way up. This has been particularly helpful for rural voters. There's a lot of folks who live in really far-flung places of Utah. Universal mail voting, where everybody who is registered to vote automatically receives a ballot in the mail, has been hugely helpful there. In surveys, voters routinely say, we like this, we trust it, we want to keep it. By the way, nothing has really changed in terms of political power in Utah as a result of them having this over the last decade or so. Republicans ran the show then, and they run the show now. But here in 2025, it's just a different game. Like I said, national politics are invading at the local level in a really striking way. And so Utah, just the other day, their legislature, controlled by Republicans in both chambers, passed a bill to end automatic, universal, all-male voting. Why did they do this? Was it because there was an issue with voter fraud? Well, no, audits showed that there wasn't. Is it because it wasn't actually helpful and doing what it was meant to do by juicing turnout? No, turnout was way up. Did voters have an issue with it? No, they say that they love it. They did this because they're Republicans, and that's what you do. And there literally were Republican legislatures during committee hearings who were saying, it doesn't sit right with me to look around the country and see that we're in league with states like Colorado and Oregon, and these other blue states that have universal all-male voting. They upended this very successful system for really no good reason. They did it to appeal to a Republican voter base that, because of Donald Trump and his allies, don't trust mail voting. They did it to win praise from the Heritage Foundation, which has state-by-state ranking of voter access. So anyway, that's just an example, a sort of extreme and recent example of how you vote and when you're allowed to vote and whether your vote gets counted is hugely dependent on who is in power in your state or in your county. And as a general rule, again, when it's Republicans, you can pretty well guess that your access is going to be more limited.
Are these issues that voters will care enough about to try to bring back in some way, given that you were saying in Utah specifically, mail voting was very popular, and something that seemed to benefit a lot of the people there?
You're right to bring up recourse that voters have, because that really goes hand in hand with the actual policy changes. That's a really important thing to talk about. And you're right. Something we write about all the time at Bolts is direct democracy, the ability of citizens to say, we've got an issue with X or Y policy. We're going to go gather signatures and we're going to put this thing on the ballot and see what the people actually think. Lawmakers are not stupid. They understand very well that that is a potent option for the populace. And when and where they fear the citizen vote, they often take steps to minimize that voice. My colleague, Daniel, who you mentioned a second ago, just wrote a story out of Arkansas where they are advancing a slew of changes related to ballot measures and citizen-initiated petitions, including one that really stuck with me that would require petitioners. You know, picture you're outside of a grocery store or you're at a music festival and somebody comes up with you and says, hey, we're trying to do this. Will you sign? Everybody's been there. One of the reforms in Arkansas would change it such that the petitioner would have to read to you word by word or you would have to read to yourself the language of the ballot measure. Daniel timed himself doing this with one example, and it took like 4 or 5 minutes. Imagine how hard it is to get somebody to stop outside of the grocery store and talk to you for a few minutes about whatever issue. Then imagine you said, okay, well, now I got to give you this homework assignment. You need to read this thing, which, by the way, is written in total legalese because that's how these things go. That's a really clever, frankly, a very clever way to make it a lot harder for these initiatives to qualify. I'll go back to Utah for a second because I was just there. In addition to what I mentioned about mail voting, they are advancing a proposal to make it so that anybody bringing a citizen initiative would have to perform an independent fiscal analysis that shows how much would this cost, where would we cut from the budget. Legislative analysts who work for the state are going to do that in any event. If somebody says we want a new 2% tax to fund public parks, legislative analysts are going to run those numbers and say, here's how that impacts the state budget. By commanding that the citizens who would propose that perform that analysis, it's just another hurdle. Just like the Arkansas thing I mentioned, in ways big and small, states make it a lot harder for citizens to hold the legislature in check and to say, actually, we want to make these changes. And like I said, in Arkansas, there's a lot of really clever and small ways to do it. It can be a real death by a thousand cuts thing. And it can be something that totally flies under the radar. An overarching theme that I'll just close this point on is something I have found covering local politics everywhere is the average person just is not thinking about this stuff, understandably. It's not just that the local press has been hollowed out, which it has. It's not just that social media is a mess and it's impossible to navigate and to get to the real truth anymore for a lot of people, or at least it feels impossible. People are busy. People are doing stuff. People are taking kids to school and doing jobs and making dinner and so on. And the average person is just not going to follow the 7 bills in Arkansas that seek to upend direct democracy. The average person in Utah doesn't really have an informed opinion on fiscal analyses related to ballot measures, but lawmakers know what they're doing, and the stuff that they are advancing really works. That's why they go.
So you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation that you also cover election administration. I know there was a lot of talk leading up to the 2024 election about threats to election administrators, people resigning from their jobs or otherwise burning out because of, whether it was physical threats of violence or just increased pressure or in all the ways that their jobs just became unpleasant in some degree or another. But then I feel like after the election, the message kind of became, okay, well, there was not widespread violence. A lot of these threats never came to fruition. The election was free, fair, and secure. And so this is like something that we don't have to worry about anymore. And so I guess I just wonder the sources that you have, the folks that you talk to, how are they feeling now? How are they feeling as they think about the next elections to come? Are those threats still there? And if so, what are they doing to make sure that they're ready to combat them?
Well, to state the very obvious, the reason that this election felt smoother in terms of protest or incidents of violence or threats to election administrators is because Donald Trump won. It's just that simple. This is something, the stress, the pressure, county clerks, election administrators very much feel this. I am talking to these folks on probably a weekly basis all around the country. I am impressed always with their resilience. I think something that the average person might not really realize is that the people who run your elections these are like office jobs. It is boring administrative paperwork in a lot of cases, but it's incredibly important work. And these folks, particularly in states that offer a lot of local control, like Wisconsin, for example, these states confer a lot of power upon these people to make voting easy or not. And they might have diminished budgets because their state legislature is not making their life easier, doesn't want to help them out. They face incredible pressures over vote counting and ballot distribution and an immense amount of scrutiny. I mean, I'm a journalist. I think that scrutiny is a good thing. Of course, accountability is a good thing, but you hear from these clerks. I talked to one a couple weeks ago who said, when I started doing this work 10, 15 years ago, we would have these, poll worker observation opportunities where you could come and watch ballots be counted. And one or two, usually retired, like especially civically engaged people would show up. And in the last election, we had to have an overflow room because people by the dozens were coming out for this. Again, scrutiny in and of itself is not a bad thing, but the reason that that county clerk has an overflow observation room and didn't 10 years ago is because of Donald Trump and his movement, the Republican Party, sowing intentionally distrust in elections that are run by average people, that are run by usually elected, but typically kind of, not like famous folks who just want to do the work. The work is fueled by everyday volunteers, by civil servants who work in the office, who don't make a lot of money, and who are working hard just to keep up. Of course, it's no secret, as you alluded to, this worker base has been hugely demoralized in recent years. There's been a ton of turnover in states, a ton of institutional knowledge lost in county clerk's offices, in Secretary of State's offices. And that's because, well, how would you feel if you worked in a job where you were constantly being undermined, or at least being threatened to be undermined by officials in power? How would you feel getting hate mail, getting, scary letters sent to your house or voicemails? That stuff is real and it happens all over the place. I think the reason you didn't hear so much about it in the last few months, again, is because Donald Trump won. But we should be under no illusion that this problem is solved. It's not going anywhere.